checks, etc. That directors have contracts in place with the organisation and also senior executives. In my experience, particularly in the not-for-profit space, it's common to have contracts for your employees, but often the directors themselves don't have contracts in place. Interestingly now, the role of the company secretary has been, for some organisations, elevated to a requirement that they report to the chair. That's seen to be a good governance practice rather than having the company secretary report to the chief executive officer, or as often the case in the publicly listed sector, the chief financial officer. And Paul mentioned earlier about the issue of independence in the context of directors' duties. Interestingly, there have been changes in this area in terms of corporate governance principles as well. And now under the ASX guidelines, boards must disclose, they've always had to disclose whether they consider a director to be independent, but the criteria for independence has been broadened. It's been broadened to look at family ties that a director may have with the organisation, and also a broader sweeping condition has been included where the board consider the length of service of the individual and as to whether that would compromise independence. Interestingly, in the precursor to these principles, when the discussion paper came out, it was suggested that a period of 9 years would compromise independence, and you'd have to explain why you thought a director could continue to be independent if they'd been on the board for more than 9 years. That seems to have been dropped in the actual principles that have been released, but that provides a good guidance as to where the thinking is from the ASX. Also interestingly is that in terms of executive remuneration, which many of you will have heard about, it's been quite a topical area over the last 4 or 5 years, there is now a requirement in the corporate governance principles that there is disclosure of any clawback policies you may have in relation to your executives, and that there be provisions to clawback bonuses that have been received where there has been serious misconduct, or pertinently where there's been a material misstatement of the financial statements of the organisation. So similar to a Centro circumstance, for example, there you'd be able to claw back any bonuses that may have been awarded prior to the disclosure of the issues in relation to their financial statements. Also in relation to the corporate governance guidelines, there have been some changes in the area of finance and risk. One of them, the first dot point, is in relation to financial declarations from CEOs and CFOs. Under the Corporations Act, the CEO and CFO are required to provide a declaration to the board that the financial statements have been provided, have been prepared in accordance with the Corporations Act and accurately reflect the affairs of the company. That statement is only required once a year in relation to the end-of-year financial statements. Under the ASX Corporate Governance Guidelines, CEOs and CFOs will be required to provide that whenever they are declaring the financial statements for any period of time. Quite commonly in the publicly listed space, that would be for half-yearly statements. There's also been some changes in relation to risk committees, and I know that this is a topic dear to Paul's heart, so I might introduce Paul just to have a chat about that.
I don't know where to start after that introduction. I have to confess, as a former CEO, I used to hate doing risk management plans, and so that's why I've stumbled at that introduction. I think the interesting thing about risk is that the Corporate Governance Council's come out recommending that boards have risk committees. Most boards, though, are moving down a pathway of combining audit and risk together, recognising that they are not separate, that they actually do interrelate with each other, and understanding your risk exposures is really important for the audit committee. And so we see organisations combining audit and risk committees as one, and so their calendar spreads the task of audit and risk over a whole year together. We also see organisations where the audit committee will meet for a couple of hours, and immediately after, the same people meet as a risk committee. So they are consciously trying to integrate audit and risk together. The second point there around the board's annual review of the risk management framework, most organisations are moving down a pathway of having a risk management plan and undertaking some sort of governance processes around that review. You know, the important thing is for boards to clearly understand the distinction between strategic risks, compliance risks and operational risks, and to understand how management is approaching the mitigation of those risks. There is no value for the management team or the board in receiving, you know, the dashboard with lots of colours on it, unless they're really clear that management has got a system or process in place for managing the key risks of the organisation, and the board understand that management is on top of that. The challenge for all directors is that you can come up with the most highly detailed list of risks for an organisation, but they may never be the ones that actually cause you the greatest strife. And so you've got to have some sense of the resilience required in an organisation to overcome changes in the external environment. You've got to have your antenna up to understand what's occurring that is going to have a strategic impact on your organisation, and that's just good director behaviour. The fourth point there around the Corporate Governance Council's recommendation to have an internal audit function. As a director, I'm a really big fan of internal audit. Whether if you're large enough to have an in-house capacity, or for most organisations, and certainly the ones that I'm involved in, you're looking to outsource that to a specialist advisor, such as an accounting firm or a risk management firm. But it's worth going out and getting quotes, because, you know, a single sweep of review of one particular area of your function is actually not that expensive. But from a director's perspective, you know, external audit is really a process designed for shareholders and members to ensure the integrity of the financial statements in the annual report. Internal audit's a process that directors give direction to review the internal systems and processes to understand that they're meeting the requirements of the organisation. I've got some great experiences of internal audit undertaking a review of purchasing controls, and in one particular department, you know, we discovered that the organisation had 250 staff and 180 mobile phones. They didn't know who had the mobile phones. And in my view, there's a lot of teenage kids roaming around Melbourne using our organisation's funded mobile phones. And that's a classic example of the benefit of having a good, sound internal audit process. And the last one